Travel is an exciting experience. Uh, like anywhere in the world, travel industry is active. It's active in the sense that it works with the development sector, it works with culture, it works with the biodiversity, and it's spread all around the world. Now, if you look at all the data, tourism is one sector, one industry that provides 1 out of 10 jobs in the world, which also makes it very vulnerable. Whenever something like a disaster happens, a natural disaster that happens, it affects the communities there. So tourism sector, it works in the mountains, it works in the coastal areas, it's there with the local communities. You can see the tourism industry working in some of the most vulnerable parts of the world. Now, what I want to do right now is to bring your attention to scenarios where how the tourism sector is affected because of the climate change. Now, this image that you see here is from the Pemba beach in Mozambique, just before Cyclone Kenneth happened. And after the landfall, one day after, this is what is happening. Some of the most vulnerable communities who benefit a lot from the tourism live in these places. Now, climate change has created such an impact in a way that tourism industry also has a role to play in terms of the greenhouse gas emission. Now, if you look at again the data, we are finding out that more than 1.2 billion jobs are every year affected because of climate change related disasters. And it's creating migration. There are a lot of refugees that are happening, like even in a small state where I come from, Kerala in India, we've got like more than 60,000 people who are climate refugees. Now, one of the hypotheses that we are working on is, if a community is not resilient to climate crisis, they are not in a position to overcome, they are not in a position to face the impacts of the ensuing natural disaster. But how do you build this resilience? How do you make sure that the communities have the agency? How do you ensure that the communities are empowered to fight against a crisis like this? So this is where we are looking at the tourism industry as one of the verticals that can actually add value in terms of bringing in the sustainability on the efforts by the community. Now, this one particular image, this is from an initiative that we kickstarted in Kerala soon after the 2018 floods. This is called Chekuti, a little doll that became sort of a beacon of resilience. In 2018, when the floods happened in Kerala, Kerala was not really known for such large floods ever. What we knew was in 1924, when we had a large flood, we call it as the Great Floods of Kerala, which touched literally every piece of land in Kerala. Now, that memory has completely disappeared from the minds of people, and when the floods happened, it came out as a surprise. And we were working with communities there, especially the weavers, and came across about 300 families who were affected by the floods. All the stock they had, all the materials they had were all underwater. Their stock, the loom, the tools were all underwater for about 8 feet for 12 days. So this is the only livelihood that they had. So instead of burning all the dirty clothes, what we did is, with support of 50,000 plus volunteers in 29 countries, we upcycled these clothes, these very fine clothes which were dirty as well as not in a chance to be sold any longer. We made little dolls out of it. So a sari, which was just about, say, 1,500 rupees, so roughly about $12, we upcycled that sari into 200 and 300 dolls, which meant 1,500 rupees sari where we were able to sell it at 9,000, ensuring that not a single woman lost her job. The industry was back in action within about 3 months' time. And from this initiative, we started looking at how can this one particular islands of excellence can be replicated. where the tourism industry can actually work with the communities, where the tourism industry can actually work in partnership with the humanitarian sector. So now, this is not the first time anyone has done it. If you look at various initiatives from, say, TripAdvisor, they had an initiative during the refugee crisis where they worked with the local community, they worked with IRC to ensure that homes were provided for the refugees in Europe, in US, in different parts of the world. And we had Airbnb homes where they facilitated their platform to be used by the hosts so that the communities of refugees could actually go in and live in those homes. And then companies like us, the Blue Yonder in Kerala, what we were trying to do was to repurpose our tourism business so that we can actually become the first responders when a crisis happens. Now, if you look at the tourism industry, there is hardly anything that we do not touch from an airport-to-airport service, whether it's logistics, the knowledge of supply chain, logistics, accommodation, food and beverage, and not the least, highly skilled human resources, which is exactly what is needed by the humanitarian sector during a crisis. So, a $8 trillion travel industry, how can we utilize the power of that industry to support the humanitarian sector? Now, humanitarian sector is just about $27 billion sector. And the humanitarian sector now, I would say, is in a crisis because the natural disasters that's happening all around the world is making the humanitarian sector spreading far too thin. Earlier, you would say that, okay, Maldives is in crisis, some other part of the world is in a drought-prone area, they are vulnerable, they are in a crisis. But now if you look at it, every part of the world is in a crisis because of natural disasters, thanks to climate crisis. Flash floods are happening here in DC, it's happening in New York, it's happening in my village. Like, it's happening in my state, the tidal flood is affecting our lives to the extent that 6,000 families had to move out. These are the people whom we call as the climate refugees. And it's happening around the world. The earlier way how the humanitarian sector worked is that somebody in some other part of the world is in crisis. People fly in from Europe, they fly in from North America, and they go to help people. They provide materials to these people. Now, my question is, the humanitarian sector for a long time has been talking about the need for localization, the need for empowering the community, the need for giving strength and finances and resources to national organizations. They even had a gathering in Sendai, which came to be known as the Sendai Framework. Now, 2022, where are we? Isn't it a time that the humanitarian sector actually looks at other sectors as well, namely the tourism industry? And the tourism industry, in my perspective, is that my experience as well is the most underutilized sector that needs to be engaged by the humanitarian sector. And it's not just about the tourism or the humanitarian sector. Now, when a crisis happens, we are talking about the impacts, we are talking about putting together resources, but what about building resilience in the sense of what can we do in terms of disaster risk reduction? Now, this is exactly what we are doing in the sense of repurposing tourism to be not only a first responder, but to be a very powerful agent where you can actually work on development challenges in the world. Now, that is where the whole idea of climate resilient and climate responsible destinations come to the picture. Now, you constantly hear about the impacts of climate change. You constantly hear about how it's affecting communities around the world, how it is affecting businesses, how it's affecting the world in general. Like a small state like Kerala in India had to run around looking for $5 billion to rebuild Kerala in a better way. How sustainable is this? If a destination, if a community is constantly affected by disasters, do you think that travelers are going to visit it often? Because this fear of being part of a vulnerable destination will affect you. So the language of communication needs to change. The perspectives have to change. We need to see that even if destinations are vulnerable, that a community that is very compassionate, a community that takes care of each other, a community that works with different sectors, gives a positive story. And it becomes an amazing storytelling opportunity. So like similar to this small initiative that I was talking about, the Pokali, like in the state of Kerala, again, there is one particular rice that we've been working on called Pokali. And this rice is something that can withstand the saline influences into the water. It can grow in saline water. It grows to 1.5 meters tall. So what we did was to work with the farmers to create producers that are climate change resistant and then link them with the market. But now the question is, how often can an initiative, how often can entrepreneurs keep on innovating when the crises are much more frequent and much more happening in a way that it is difficult to handle by a small government or by a small community. Now, this is where the whole idea of climate change resilient and climate change resistant destinations are a need of the hour. So right now we are at a stage where we are putting together a global platform called Climate Resilient and Climate Responsible Destination, where partners from the travel industry, partners from the humanitarian sector, partners from the development sector all come together, so that these small initiatives that are working in different parts of the world can actually have a common platform. And this is exactly the reason why we are here at Devex, so that we could communicate with communities, communicate with people who represent the communities, people from the development sector and the financial aid, so that we could actually work with them to set up this platform. So we really believe that the community, this climate resilient and climate responsible destination is something the humanitarian sector will benefit a lot. And for the tourism sector, it is not only, it's not at all a philanthropic activity. Like when we ask the peers in tourism industry to invest in the climate change related initiatives, we are not looking at it as a CSR initiative. We are telling them to invest in the community. We are telling them to invest in the initiatives because it's a wonderful ROI. Just imagine you are investing millions of dollars into a destination. You are building resorts, you are building hotels, you are launching tourism activities. And what if they just get wiped out in a flood or in a cyclone? How do we make sure that the hyper-local level initiatives actually have a forecasting ability when it comes to flood or when it comes to any of the climate change related impacts? And that is the power that we want to we want the community to have. And that to achieve that, we actually need a base camp to launch this initiative, to launch this global platform. So that is what the CRCRD is all about, and we look forward to have partners from the tourism development and the humanitarian sector to work with us. Thank you so much.